Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. On the show today, Russell Delman. So Russell is someone I've been really looking forward to talk to. I've known about his work for a while, coming from a really rich background in Zen, in Feldenkrais, in focusing various kinds of body modality. He's trained teachers all over the world. He's been doing some very interesting things. So welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Mark.
I normally begin interviews by asking people, how did they get interested in the body? So what was the beginning of your journey into this world?
Well, it's really hard to say how that started. I mean, as a young man, I was interested in sports and I liked to move. So there was, not in the very conscious way that I grew into, but it was always there. And I also think there was a link, believe it or not, to my mother, where when I was very young, she was kind of a psychic woman who was also challenged, manic depression, things like that. And I used to rub her legs because she used to say, that's the only thing that calms me down. I'd rub her calves and her feet. And we had this relationship where I would do that almost every day from like 8 years old to 12, her calves and her feet. And she would say, you have the best hands. You're going to be an osteopath. And I used to say, no, Mom, I want to be a psychiatrist, because she was always seeing psychiatrists. And so an osteopathic psychiatrist is kind of like Feldenkrais, we could say. So somehow from the 8 years old, I was already tuned to the power of the body as a vehicle of affecting a whole human being. And then out of that, when I was about 18 and started to meditate, I realized that the form I was attracted to, Zen, was very body-based, was really being in the present moment in your body. And that I just took to. And so that opened me to yoga and to Moshe Feldenkrais, and it all kind of grew from there.
Wonderful. There's a lot we can go into here. We have time. So why don't we start with Feldenkrais, because you're the first Feldenkrais practitioner we've had, or someone from that background we've had on the show.
Yes.
So, who was Moshe Feldenkrais and what is the Feldenkrais method for those that may have never heard of it? Because it's not as well known as I'd kind of like it to be still to this day.
Sure.
So what is it?
Well, so let me start with Moshe Feldenkrais and then go into the methodology. So he was a truly unique human being. He was born in 1904 in the Ukraine, traveled with villagers, left his family behind when he was 13 years old, and walked and rode horses and took a boat to Palestine, where he lived in Palestine and Israel most of his life, from 13 till he died in 1984 at the age of 80. And he was an incredibly diverse human being, very physically strong. He helped build Tel Aviv. He was one of the Jewish youth protecting their part of the beach when there was a lot of armed combat. He learned jujitsu as a young man, and actually his first two books, this is not well known, were on the martial arts. He developed methods of taking knives away from attackers that are still in use today. And in fact, I'll get to how he got there, but when he went to Paris to study at the Sorbonne, the originator of modern day judo, Professor Kano from Japan, saw his book. There's a whole long story about that. I won't tell it now. And decided to train him to bring judo to the continent. So he started the Paris Judo School, the London Judo School, and was a major influence on bringing judo into Europe. So he was a master in the martial arts. He was also, by profession, an engineer, mathematician, physicist. He had PhDs in various fields, lots of patents in electronics. He worked in the Curie laboratory in Paris in radioactive research, escaped when the Nazis came in with heavy water from that research and escaped to England and lived there working in the war effort with a group of scientists. So an amazing background.
It's an incredible life. When you hear his bio, it's almost like it's not true, is it? It's really unbelievable life this guy had. Like one of the first, if not the first, black belt in Europe, and crazy stuff in the war and Israel, and it's just like a hell of an adventure.
It's true. It's an amazing movie. So he was very brilliant in terms of his command of the sciences, very physical, and that's fairly unique to have somebody so competent mentally and so competent physically, and was also had an interest in spirituality. His both his grandfathers were famous rabbis in the old country, and although he was not religious himself, he was interested in the Kabbalah, the ancient traditions, and eventually into Gurdjieff and movements of consciousness. So all of that was living together in him. So then he came back after the war to Israel and had been developing, with the scientists he was living with, was developing ways of movement, not judo now, but developing his own movement system to help them be freer in their bodies. He began to see, while living there, this is back late 30s and in the 40s, he began writing his first books about embodiment and about how, I'll give you a great example. One of his best friends had become impotent, and he noticed that the man walked always with his pelvis tucked under. And he gave him certain lessons, both with his hands and through movement, to get him mobile in his pelvis. And as all great stories go, he ended up very functional sexually. His wife was very happy. And it was an example of Feldenkrais's thinking when he was still functioning as a scientist, but getting into the power of bodily movement and bodily awareness. So when he went back to Israel, his first job was with the budding Israeli Air Force, but he started to work privately with clients and to develop classes in what came to be called the Feldenkrais method. He didn't start it as the Feldenkrais method. He was helping people. And then, much to the dismay of his mother, who was an old painter in Israel at this time, he gave up his work in the world of science and in the world of the Air Force and devoted himself to teaching people with his hands and with his voice.
And the method, I feel in some ways is coming of age now. There's been yoga seems to be kind of really taking it on board, and various movement disciplines. And it's quite a unique method. And as you say, whether it's a hands-on body work or it's a class, there's two forms, right? The hands-on body work and then the class format, the awareness through movement formats. It's not like you're prodding and poking people or stretching or getting them to stretch. Quite the opposite. I mean, when I first did a class 10 years ago, I was shocked at how slow I had to go, and it was used. I was used to martial arts, and it was more, go strong and hard, and it was less effort and slower. And as I mean, you can help clarify this maybe, but for me, what's beautiful and unique about it is that it's working primarily with awareness rather than stretching or trying to improve meridians or some sort of other method.
Yeah, it's really somewhat unique in that way, Mark, that Feldenkrais realized that the main work was, we could look at it in two ways. One is with awareness. The other is with the human nervous system, the human brain, and its capacity for learning new patterns of movement.
Yeah.
You learn those new patterns with awareness, because if you don't have awareness, you have to repeat the old patterns of breathing, of sitting, of standing, of walking. So what he realized, and he ended up calling the movement work awareness through movement. And there are thousands of awareness through movement lessons. When you go to a Feldenkrais teacher, you will be doing one lesson, but it'll be one of a big library of potential lessons. Many of them are very small, subtle, slow movements. Some of them are faster. There's even eventually judo rolls or standing on your head. But mostly it's learning to tune in very intimately and deeply with your own physicality and bringing presence to movement. And then with the hands-on work, which is called functional integration, the practitioner, you have your clothes on, and the practitioner is very gently using their hands to do two things again. One, show your nervous system alternative patterns of movement. And two, helping you be aware of the possibilities of moving differently.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the two legs the work stands on.
So this is, I mean, I just want to underline this because you can stretch a muscle for a long, long time and, maybe see a little bit of improvement. But I've done single ATM lessons from the internet that lasted an hour, which is, pretty typical as far as I can tell. And I've done some classes in person, but also just a bunch that I've downloaded as podcasts. There's a great lady in America who does them. And all of a sudden I went from sort of hardly being at a back bend to really having like a kind of advanced yogic back bend, or from barely touching my toes to having my palms on the floor. Like really quite significant differences that my kind of yoga friends would be struggling maybe for years of stretching and pulling. And I'm, and that's just on the physical level, seeing an outcome. It's like, wow, I could turn to face that wall and now I can turn to face a whole 90 degrees more. It's really quite astounding sometimes from these lessons.
Yeah. It really is. I'm so glad you've had those experiences, because it's hard for people to understand just verbally that there's a real difference working where in the foreground is the musculoskeletal system, or in the foreground is the way the nervous system learns and moves.
Yeah.
When you're focusing, I mean, it's beautiful to stretch. It can be beautiful to run. It can be beautiful to do all sorts of things for your muscles. And I don't at all put down other systems. Yoga is beautiful. Going to the gym for some people is great. So there's many approaches, but there's something unique about prioritizing the patterns of movement in the nervous system and prioritizing awareness.
It strikes me as a very intelligent approach, which is why I think a lot of people in the kind of yoga world or bodywork world are coming to, if not something similar, something with a nervous system orientation. Because while, it's not going to get you fit, so there's definitely uses to other systems, you're not going to get stronger. But in terms of just freedom of, it seems to me there's two main groups of people that do Feldenkrais. There's the people who are physically really unwell and can barely move, and then people who want to move beautifully. And if I look at the best dancers I know, or some of the best movers I know in yoga or dance, often they're the ones who have done Feldenkrais. And is there a piece also in the middle about emotional expression? Because if we're limited in habitual ways of physically moving, I guess that also translates into more limited sort of social or emotional expressions.
Yes, absolutely. That was part of Feldenkrais's great insight back in the 30s that was really ahead of its time, was recognizing, well, two great insights, I would say. One was the unity of the human being, that our motor patterns are not only habits in the body, but they're habits in ways of being in the world, which includes how we interact with others, how we relate to our own feelings, how we are in the world. In some ways, it's so obvious, and yet it's so easily missed. It's like every actor or director knows that somebody walking on stage with a different kind of movement, a different kind of carriage, their chest lifted or lowered, their head dropped or raised, that it's a different character.
Yeah.
We know it, but we don't recognize that that's us in everyday life, going through our life with our often fairly rigid patterns.
Yeah, and that we almost describe the kind of birth of what I'd call the embodiment movement.
Yeah.
And I think Feldenkrais is definitely one of the sort of few biggest names. Many of my teachers were trained by him, at least in part, and every time you get interested in one of the sort of your kind of generation and younger teachers, they're often come through a lineage that goes at least through him or is connected to him. And that realization of like, hey, hang on a minute, we're not just making meat move more efficiently, we're working with human beings.
Yes, but really, really so important and so so insightful back in the days. He felt a little bit crazy because the people were not, he was seeing things so differently. And he would say, usually when one person is seeing things so differently, it's usually they're nuts.
It's a rule of thumb that nearly always works. Yeah.
So,
but he ended up at Esalen, right? Which we had Don Hanlon Johnson on the show, who's rolfing trainer, heavily involved with Esalen, maybe
yes.
Don, and he was sort of, there was this mixture of Esalen as one of the epicenters of this work, which ended up now in England and Russia, everywhere else in the world, of Feldenkrais, and then with the psychotherapists. And I know you also work with some of the sort of Gestalt people. It seems like that's where body work and martial arts and dance with Gabrielle Roth collided with the kind of therapeutic type traditions.
Yes, very much so. And it's when we start seeing the oneness of the human being, and we start realizing that human being can be approached, and it's very helpful to approach at these various levels, and that when the body is left out, it's like you're making, if you want to do psychological work or you want to do spiritual work, or these categories that are unfortunately separate in our minds, that leaving out the physical infrastructure of those states. And that's a really important concept, that our bodily patterns are an infrastructure for certain mental states, for certain ways of being in the world, ways of seeing ourselves. And to leave that out is so unfortunate and makes the work so much harder for people.
Yeah, I think sort of psychologists realized, from Reich on through, particularly through the kind of, 60s kind of guys coming in, that the body was important for psychologists, but then also the body workers are discovering psychology, right? There's a kind of, and like for me, Feldenkrais, there is nothing better for freedom of movement within the body. I'll just put it out there because I've tried most things. And so I really want to kind of keep bigging it up because as I said, I don't think it's quite as popular as I'd love it to be. I kind of somehow wonder why it's not so well known. And is it because it doesn't, it's not dramatic, or you have to go slow and patiently?
Yeah, I think that's true. And in some ways, Mark, I'll be surprised if it's ever really popular.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a bad thing.
It doesn't give the buzz of a yoga class, or like, why is it not huge when it works so well? I find it hard to understand.
It's working really counterculturally, especially today, in terms of speed, doing things really fast, getting a quick result. And that's why a lot of the more power yogas are even getting more popular than some of the original yogas.
Yeah.
The Bikram and the power and the this, that people want to see. It's very ego building, actually.
And it feels like it's doing something, right? It's like, okay, my quadriceps are burning and I'm sweating a lot and it hurts. So it must, this sort of Calvinistic ethic of it must be good for me because it hurts. And it's interesting, when I was doing Feldenkrais lessons, and I still get challenged by this, the biggest challenge for me in the practice is slowing down and not pushing my limit, because I'm characteristically very similar to the culture of the modern world. Like, my personality is very aligned with modern culture. I like fast, hard, and I like pushing my edge.
Right.
And that means when I went to Feldenkrais, I think for the first year, I just didn't get it. And then as soon as I started doing it, I started getting loads of benefit. But as you say, it was counter to my entire personality, or the entire culture we're in, to not try hard.
Right. And as things get faster and speedier and more techno and all like that, it is really a counterpoint to all that. So I would be surprised. I think it's really what the culture needs. It's really an antidote. And it's part of why it's so often people who are in pain, or people at the upper end of movement potential, are willing to do it, because the people in pain are often desperate, or not only pain, but movement dysfunction, cerebral palsy, neurological things. And then, as you were saying before, dancers and martial artists like being in there. They're kinesthetic. They like to sense themselves. But the people, the broad majority of people, most of them will find it slow at the beginning and
boring. And like, as you say, what's your motivation? Unless you're a high level mover, which is what I'd recommend it to most of the people who listen to this podcast, or you're like seriously just not able to get out of a chair. And I was just to find it quite funny as a sort of nearly middle-aged guy. I'd be in a class and everyone in there would be like either a beautiful young woman who I'd want as my lover, or like some, sort of beautiful silver-haired old lady I wanted as my grandmother. And then, it was sort of like, where's the middle ground? It was always this sort of very beautiful and aesthetic or athletic or, really, because Feldenkrais people can move very beautifully as well, can't they? They can be an oiled kind of fluidity and a poise. Yeah. Okay, so what was missing for you in that, or why did you want to develop that? Because on the one hand, I see Feldenkrais as being wonderfully physical, but actually it didn't and doesn't go as much into the psychological and emotional as I would like. I used to go there and be like, wow, that's really interesting. There's this whole new way of being that's freed up to me. And it wasn't really it was still on much more on the sort of physical, right, looking at it through the lens of physicality. And I wonder if you went through a similar process because you've added in other things and brought in other practices to that, right?
I would say not so much added as I had my own transformations when I developed the Embodied Life School, which is my teaching now, the Embodied Life. It was really recognizing, it was in the I started teaching Embodied Life retreats back in the 90s, but it was in the early 2000s when I asked myself the question, if I had 5 years left to live, what would I be doing? And in addition to a lot of time with my wife and daughter, was to bring my life teachings into the world. And what was true was that it was inappropriate in Feldenkrais trainings to bring in the meditation work that was so important to my development, and to bring in the awareness of feelings and how to be with one's feeling life in helpful ways.
Yeah, the emotional.
Right, the emotions, how to bring awareness to that realm of experience in ways that were congruent with Feldenkrais, but added, were not intrinsic to the method.
Yeah.
I realized that I was teaching all this in my retreats, but I couldn't teach it in my Feldenkrais trainings. So then I made the transition to creating the Embodied Life trainings, the mentorship programs, I call them. And there we do a lot of sitting meditation, we do Feldenkrais movement, and we learn ways of communicating with our inner world through awareness and communicating with others through awareness. So those are the key pieces that were missing for me. It's essential, in my opinion, well, that's a little grandiose. Let's say it like this. For people who are attracted to a really integrated way of working, learning to sit quietly with yourself, which is sometimes called meditation, is really important. Learning not to be moving, not to be doing, but to be noticing what comes when you're pausing your activity. Really important for peace in the world. So that's one side. Another side is being able to be present with the challenging feelings that we all have at different times, and how they live in our body, and how to bring a combination of language and bodily sensation together so that there's a unity between our cognitive and our emotional life and our physical life, that they're living as one experience. And when that's true, when the mental function, the emotional function, and the physical function are all integrated in a single moment, they tend to unwind in the body, in the emotions, and in the imagery. So it's actually a holistic way of helping life to get unstuck and move forward. So when I saw all that, and focusing was helpful with that, Gestalt work was helpful with that, I realized, oh my God, I can't bring this gift to my students in the traditional Feldenkrais form, as brilliant as it is. And
yeah.
Great to do a Feldenkrais training.
Yeah.
But to bring my life teaching together, these other two legs needed to be there, the meditation leg and how to communicate internally and externally in a holistic way.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. You know, I think I'm glad we've said some good things about Feldenkrais, and I also wouldn't just be happy with it as a solo practice, because for me, you know, I'd say the same of yoga as well. Yes, it's great to have a mindful movement practice, and Feldenkrais is certainly that. But then there's also like, okay, when you're really sitting, you notice the kind of subtler movements of the mind that you might not notice if you were doing mindful martial arts or yoga or Feldenkrais or anything else. And then there's the emotional sense, which is generally, you know, ignored by most of the Eastern practices. They're sort of, you know, the martial arts say about emotions, try not to have them. And you know, it's very difficult to notice your subtle emotion of sadness when your hamstrings are screaming from an intense hot yoga class. And then, you know, so it's tuning into the emotional domain. And then there's bringing that socially, right? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you do some kind of communication, like listening, because it's one thing getting present with the body, but then there's like, if we can't bring that into the social domain, Russell, what's the point? Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, really key, Mark. I'm glad you're bringing that, because so many people who are oriented towards inner work, whether it's meditation or psychological work or body work, there's such a trap of cultural narcissism. There's such a trap of inner focus, as if the inner world is somehow separate from the outer world. And that is a really key error in the development of consciousness. And it's much more than just an individual error. It's a
Yeah.
cultural.
Yeah.
So what I've come to see is that often people who are doing deep inner work really need some skills in how to connect what's living in them with others around them, how to enact it in the world. And similarly, people who are attracted to social activism often need to learn the inner work, because they burn out too quickly. They get overwhelmed by their anger and they're upset, and they end up either addicted to something or just burnt out. So finding how we can have all of that living together, that it's not enough for most of us just to have it inside, but to find means for bringing it out. And it's not spontaneous. Some of the really developed meditation teachers I know are terrible communicators.
Yeah, yeah. You can meditate for a long time or do yoga for a long time, get very present. Maybe you're doing embodied work, getting very sort of structurally free and aligned, but still just not be able to take that into a conversation. To
Right.
be socially skilled, or sometimes just not even a decent human being in terms of the interactions, let alone a sort of socially engaged human being who's involved in some kind of positive work in the world. And as you say, it can work the other way too. You could have those who are massively engaged in the world. Like I've met, you know, I've done quite a lot of workshop with activists, and just very emotionally unaware or emotionally badly self-regulated or not present to themselves at all, because everything's about the external world and pointing the finger outside. And if anything, I think the modern time is about bringing these together. You know, I'm seeing more sort of socially engaged somatics. I'm seeing, you know, meditation tents during activists kind of activities. You know, it feels like, while in a way kind of your generation and before it split them off, it feels like the young people younger than me are very much putting them back together.
Yes, yeah, it's part of the zeitgeist, part of the spirit of the times, is this kind of integration. I'm just one small piece of something that's much larger, that is current for the world, that just as the world is dissembling in so many ways, there's the counterforce of integration that's also here. And it's pretty fascinating to have, you know, the planet in such disarray and the politics in such disarray, and there are these small groups all over the world that are beginning to integrate aspects of developing humanity that have been separate in the past.
And I mean, to give you due credit here, you're certainly one of the few, though, that's doing what I'd call a truly integrated mindfulness
I agree.
approach. Like, I see great meditation schools, I see great bodywork schools, I see some social stuff, like this circling movement's really cool, and it's like relational kind of listening. But I don't really see, and it's my vision to make a place in London where this happens, but I don't really see very few schools that are doing, I remember once I was at a meditation retreat, and after 3 days, the teacher said, everyone stand up and walk around and look at each other. And people were freaking out and crying and saying they will never come back. I'm like, we're literally just walking in a room together. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know many schools integrating these different levels of interior, emotional, body, and relational, and maybe if you look at it as a fifth level, social as well as relational in terms of social interaction and the wider world. So it's really cool that you've been doing that. That's why you've been on my radar for a while, because I was saying, is anyone doing this? And people were saying, oh yeah, there's this guy called Russell that does something kind of a bit similar.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So what does that look like in terms of, like, if you're doing a workshop? I saw you just did one in Boulder recently, or will be doing one on your website about like connecting to the external world, like how do you do, because you could live in a rarefied bubble in California or Boulder or Brighton or Byron Bay or, these beautiful places we like to live because we don't want to feel totally alone. But, we can be in these rarefied bubbles while Theresa May is the prime minister and Brexit is happening and Donald Trump is happening. And, like Australia, I believe, also has just an awful racist prime minister. So it's kind of like, on the one hand, we're these small communities and we're doing something which, for the first time in human history, is bringing together an integration of these things, which is so cool. But on the other hand, we're in this just terrifying backdrop.
Right.
How do we engage with that? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Like, how does that juxtaposition even work in 2018?
Right. Well, one of the things, so different layers. One of the things I think of, Mark, is how important it is for people who are doing this awareness, this inner awareness work, to not only open their hearts to the world, but actually get grounded in their bodies, get centered in their bodies, because we need the infrastructure of our embodiment. Martial artists know this, to feel secure, to feel I can handle difficult interactions. I can breathe and hear somebody who is, in my case, somebody who is a real Trump fan. How do I listen well so they can feel really heard? And I can notice my reactivity, but be grounded enough, present enough, that I'm not just, when we don't become two televisions looking at each other, yelling at each other, which is what usually passes for conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the left's as guilty as that as the right, for sure.
Exactly. So who's going to be first?
The left, for sure, yeah.
So my question is always, who is going to lay down their arms first? Who is going to understand before being understood? To do that, our embodiment can give us great skills like breathing, like grounding, like finding our center, so that when we can notice our reactivity, it doesn't take us over as easily. So these are actually social skills.
Yeah.
We work with, in my seminars, we actually work directly with these, and sometimes actually use asking people to come up with situations in which they tend to be activated, tend to be reactive, role play them. Okay, what's it like to be connected to yourself and in this situation? Then in some seminars, like the one you referenced in Boulder, I'll actually work directly with social justice and communication strategies, how actually to listen, how to speak your truth once you've understood the other person's reality. So sometimes that'll be a focus. More often, it's a focus on the first, on developing the capacity to withstand challenging moments without either getting hard or exiting emotionally or physically.
Yeah. It strikes me, and really that's the real deal these days. I have very little tolerance anymore but I mean, everything's got its place. I don't want to be a critic too much. And given where we're at in the world today, my tolerance for practices which don't engage socially, I just kind of think, why? Like, it just seems like a kind of narcissistic kind of circle jerk. If all we're doing is going into the body, if all we're doing is getting more and more present, which is beautiful, and hell, it feels really good, But then it's like, what's the point in feeling really good in a world that's burning? It doesn't make much sense to me anymore.
Right.
Not socially engaged.
also one of the surprising gifts of developing consciousness is it doesn't end up feeling good just to feel good.
Right.
And it's a surprise because you go, oh wow, I got my body feeling good. I got,
Yeah.
things going. Then you start realizing as any sense of separation becomes more painful as you get over the ordinary insecurities and get over the ordinary challenges. You actually don't just end up blissful, you end up with different challenges.
One of my teachers says hurts more, bothers you less. And I think it's worth saying the second bit too, or else people get disheartened, right? Because you actually hurt more with awareness practices, right? You don't hurt less, you hurt more. But it's kind of like, okay, ow, that really hurts. But I don't have to go drink a load of beer, which is what I used to do at 18 or whatever it is.
Right. And you're able to, especially as your meditation practice grows, able to have perspective that you can notice the pain and not be lost in it. You can be present for it, also find your lightness, also find other states are there simultaneously. So you're not only in your painful state. And that kind of perspective is so key for developing humanity.
That's really nice. That's really nice. So is there anything you'd like to talk about today before we move towards wrap up? The other aspects of the work that you haven't covered. I mean, there's almost certainly some good stories about Moshe Feldenkrais, but I don't know if you want to go there or not. Anything you want to talk about at all?
Let's see. I'll tell you a good Feldenkrais story that kind of connects my great gratitude to him, my work with him, and my future work. So I was one of the first people trained by him, and back in 75, there were a small group of Israelis that were working with him before that, but it was the first real organized training in San Francisco. And I got quite close to him after the training. My wife did his second training, and I was kind of helping give private lessons there and things like that. And he had his first stroke in 1981, after the second year of that second training. And I went to Israel to actually give him Feldenkrais lessons. And it was a profound time, of course. We spent a few weeks where I'd give him actually 2 lessons a day. So I learned so much during that period. He was beginning to work again, so he would work with one little girl that had many of the same symptoms that he had. So he was kind of teaching me what to do non-verbally by watching what he did with her. So that's a whole other story. But so we're sitting at his desk during the day and just talking to each other. And I had gone down to this place where people did Feldenkrais lessons for 30 years. Now they were doing them with a recording, which he did for many. He would watch them. He'd make recordings and watch them move and then revise the recordings. He did this for many years. So watching the people move, I was shocked that after the class, when they would get on the bus, they were just as aggressive as the other Israelis. They were just as pushy. And
I've worked out there a lot. That rings bells.
So I said to him, Moshe, what I've noticed in my own practice and with some people who've been doing your work for many years is some of them seem to generalize the movement work to their way of being in the world, but it's not consistent.
Yeah.
So it really remains a bodily experience that doesn't seem to migrate over to other brain regions, so that their way of being social is different, their way of speaking is. So, and I said, Moshe, you predicted in your writings that if there was this change here, that it would basically automatically happen here.
Yeah.
And he looked at me, and it was scary to bring up the subject. I was young and I was confident. He's a very strong guy. And he said, actually, it's the greatest disappointment of my life. That that it's not automatic.
It's not automatic, is it? It's a naive view. It doesn't always happen.
What philosophers would call, it's not monistic. It's not that this creates this. It's not that they influence each other. But that was part of my creation of the embodied life work, was realizing the Feldenkrais work spontaneously for a certain group of people transforms their whole life. For a bigger group of people, it influences their bodily movements significantly and touches other places, but not hugely. And so I developed the embodied life work to take these, it's like people get so ripe from doing the Feldenkrais movements, they just need a little bit more input with the meditation, with the communication work, to generalize the softening of their chest, the groundedness of their legs, the centering of their pelvis, to bring that into everyday life.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, does it? It's the same. I see the same with yoga. People practice warrior pose and they get warrior-like, and then they quit doing the pose, and most of them aren't warrior-like when they leave the building, except a few who somehow get it. But it doesn't take much to transfer that and say, okay, let's make a warrior-like walk, or how would you express your political views in a warrior-like way? Or, we could be talking about something more yin version, and it doesn't actually take that much, does it, to help people make that, I call it bridging or transferring.
Beautiful. That's pretty exciting, I think, that awareness of that and ways of working with that.
Awesome. Yeah. I really like that. So I've really enjoyed this. The time's really gone by quickly. I need to go out dancing soon. I've got a dance date with my wife booked for this evening, so that'll be pleasant. Any final message for the world? And before that, actually, people can find you at russelldelman.com, right? That's R-U...
2 L's in Russell, 1 L in Delman. Russell.
Right, and there's all sorts of free resources on that site, isn't there? There's writings and videos and all sorts of stuff there. There's a Facebook group they can link to from there. Anywhere else people can find you that be good result?
No, that's the best place, russelldelman.com. Check the calendar. I'm in Europe 4 times a year. I don't currently have anything going on in England, but in France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, I have seminars.
Great. I know we have listeners all over the world. So personally, I was going to ask you after the recording if there's any seminars in England, but do let me know if you're back in Brighton. And any final message for our listeners, sir?
I'm grateful to you for hosting this, for doing the work you're doing in the world. And I just so encourage people to find ways of being self-connected, being grounded in themselves, physically, emotionally, learn to observe their own thoughts and feelings with care and bring their hearts into the world.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Take good care, Mark.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.